Hey everyone, today I am delighted to be joined by the lovely Tanika. She's going to be talking all about the energetics of women's menstrual cycles and the female in general. So I'm really excited to talk with her. We've got a lot of questions, so we'll see if we can get through them all. And if not, we might just do a second one because there's so much to talk about in this topic. How are you, Tanika?
I am so good and I'm so excited for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it so much because, like you said, it's such a big conversation, but I just am so passionate about it because I feel like it's something that's not spoken about enough. And bringing this to the conversation, I just feel like people listen and they're always like, oh my gosh, it's not as hectic as I first thought that it was. It's actually quite simple. And I just love talking about it so much. So thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. And yeah, you're the first person on my channel to be talking about this. And like you said, there's so few people in your community. So yeah, I'm really blessed to be able to have you on my own platform to share this knowledge. And I also wanted to share with everybody listening about my own experience that I had having a healing done with Tanika. It was last year, it was actually on my birthday, and what I thought I wanted to do was to drive. It wasn't too far. I lived relatively close to Tika and get a healing with her on my birthday. So my best friend and I, we drove up into the most beautiful scenery. She lives on land, and I was taking photos with the horses and I think there were cows. I can't remember exactly, but there's animals everywhere. And then we walk into such a peaceful space, and then I realized this is why it's called Sacred Space with Tanika Lace. And I felt really calm, and then I had my whole healing with her, and I didn't know what to expect. It was actually my first healing like this, an energetic healing. But I'm someone who I really have a busy mind. But and I didn't know if she would be able to accomplish getting me to quieten my mind and actually take me to other spaces mentally, but she did. And so I walked out with just a new peace of mind. I had just been somewhere else mentally in like a circle, as she describes, because she takes you through all the different I guess sceneries. Like she helps you with a little bit of a script and then energy, and I don't know how to put it into words because it was worth more than words. But yeah, my best friend also came out. It was really funny driving away because she was just blown away. She was transformed as well. So I was so grateful for that, Tanika. And I would honestly come back if I wasn't in a whole different country at the moment because I am almost craving another healing with you right now. So we're going to get
Oh,
straight into the
words are
topics.
so beautiful.
Yeah, we're going to get straight into the topics. And I think everyone listening by the end of this is going to completely understand why I've just talked about everything that I have. So, do you want
Yes.
to just start by introducing yourself and talking about who you are and a little bit about your story?
Yes, I would love to. And I just want to say thank you so much for your words because it is like that. It's like the energy of there's actually no words to put on the experience, but I loved
Yeah.
how you added this is why it's sacred space with Tanika Lace as soon as you got to my space because it really is one of those things where it's just the land I live on and all the animals and all the things. It really is like that. So just thank you for your words so much. But yeah, who am I? I guess I'm Tanika. I started in my business journey as a Bowen therapist, and sort of really loved the holistic health side of things. So did more like training in different energy modalities and things like that. And I really landed in menstrual cycle health with women and from a very holistic lens of looking at, how is it showing up in your physical body? How's it showing up in your spiritual body, your emotional body, all the things. So that would be like who I am in my business and things like that. And that coming from my own background in that was I actually was on the pill for like 7 years. And I feel like this is like quite the generic story of I was on the pill and then I realized I was sold a fake told that it would balance my hormones but actually it's switching them off, all the things. So I was on the pill for a couple of years and then I realized that it just wasn't agreeing with me. I didn't want to be on it. And that's really where I started my journey in understanding the cycle of our menstrual cycle, the phases, all the things. And I actually got a copper IUD. And when I had the copper IUD, that in itself was a whole other just story for another day. But basically, I thought that it was non-hormonal, but it still like really impacted my hormones. And I then got that removed and started really living in alignment with my cycle. And from there, it just like really led me to like, again, just really wanting to share this work. And I feel like it just is like a nice little bow tie on all the different things that I've kind of gone through. And that's who I am, I feel. And yeah, I just really adore the womb healing element to it as well, because we literally take on like our mother's genes and like DNA, right? And like we carry that trauma within our own cells. And I really love being able to support women in seeing that some of the stories that like you might have actually aren't yours, and we can clear them, and it doesn't have to be like the same way for you that it may have been for like your mum or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm also got a lot of questions that are going to be saying the word menstrual cycle. So I wanted to get if you have an opinion on the word menstrual itself. I've heard bleed or menstrual. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't like personally looked into that too deeply, although I always say bleed. And like I just say it from such like, I feel like it's just so natural to say like I'm on my bleed, or like I'm bleeding, or like how's your bleed. And it's really funny because to me that's just so normal and so just like of course, like and of course, right? And I feel like there's a lot of things that we have just been very much conditioned to live by or to agree to, just because that's how society has told us it is supposed to be. So that's something I would love to explore a bit further, is like the actual that word, how you just brought that in. But personally, I love just saying bleed, and also like moon cycle, right? Like we literally bleed by the moon cycle, which I think is really cool and such a huge topic within itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, because yeah, the if people haven't realized this yet, the moon's a cycle of 28 days, and a regular menstrual cycle is around 28 days as well. So there's
Yeah.
definitely a great synchronicity there. Also, women being ruled by the moon because the moon's feminine. So very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have a particular message about women's health and menstrual cycles or bleed cycles that you want to talk in depth about?
I love just looking at our menstrual cycle from more of a lens of like, how can we optimize your lifestyle, or how can we begin to live more in alignment with your inner rhythm, rather than feeling restricted by your cycle? Because, something that a lot of women face, I think, in this day and age, it being very much how you said, we are by the moon, like society's been built by the sun, by like the men's cycle. So when you have a menstrual cycle, it can be very easy to like fall into that like disconnection from yourself. So I feel like for me, something I love to just really focus on is that optimization, that connection, that bringing the awareness to how you're actually feeling, and working your life or working yourself around like the life. Like, for example, if you've got a 9 to 5, how can we actually optimize your life to still honor your body and do the thing that you kind of have to do to like live, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I feel as though a lot of women actually don't understand the 4 different phases of our cycle. I think the last time they were even talked about it at all was probably grade 8, and all the boys in the class were laughing and stuff like that. So I think this is a great time
Yeah.
for someone as knowledgeable as you in this category to go into depth on it. Just explaining first off the difference between the menstrual cycle, all the phases of this.
Yeah, I want to add as well, like I remember my experience personally in like year 8, when the teachers were going through like all the differences between like men and women and all the things. And I actually had like an anxiety attack and had to walk out of the classroom, because it was just like the way that they educate you in school is so scary, and it just
Yeah.
feels like just so much information being bombarded on you. And it's like, I feel like it's from a very fear state of like, now that you have a period, you're going to fall pregnant. And now that you have this, you're going to be in pain. And it's just not empowering at all. And I really freaking hate that. And so, of course, I would love to speak into the 4 different phases. A way that I love to explain it that I feel like is very like easy for people to like remember it. And for me on my own journey, this was like a no-brainer. Of course, this makes sense. Being women, and we're like very much in that cycle in our own rhythm, we can actually relate each phase to a season. And it just makes so much sense. It really just truly makes so much sense. Like even when you think of like, you know, Mother Earth, like she's a feminine energy. Of course, she has her own seasons, and of course, we're going to mirror that. So when we think of our bleed time, so the first phase of our cycle, our period, this is actually related to that inner winter energy. Because if you think about it, like most of the time in this phase, like you're really just in your own energy. You just want to go within. You're feeling really just like, you know, you want to just like pop a heat pack on just for comfort, get really comfortable. And this also mirrors our body temperature being its lowest as well. And then we move into the follicular phase, which is the second phase of our cycle. And this begins around day 7. We're not carbon copies of each other. So I think something else to keep in mind as I speak through this is like sometimes you're not going to feel exactly how you quote unquote should be feeling. And also sometimes your cycle might be longer or shorter to like how it should be, but just knowing that you know your own body, and like if you think there's something off, there probably is. And if you actually feel really good in like a 35-day cycle, then that's actually perfect as well. I just want to add that in. But the follicular phase is the second phase to our cycle, and this is like the inner springtime. So think of spring outside, right? Like the flowers are like everywhere, the energy is starting to rise. You're feeling really just like motivated. It's quite like just the energy of like, oh, like we're coming out of the really coolness. We can maybe go to the beach if we're in a place like that. Like it's that nice energy. And that's what's going on in our body. Like our hormones are beginning to rise, our body temperature is beginning to rise. We're coming out of our shell, we're coming out of that inward energy. And then we land in ovulation, which is our only fertile window. So I think that's also something important to remember is you can actually only fall pregnant on like 3 days of your entire menstrual cycle. So a lot of women have fear around this of thinking that they can't go off of contraception because they have that fear there. And I just wanted to be that like permission slip for you that if your body is calling to come off of contraception, as long as you're tracking your cycle, you're understanding what's going on in your body, like this is the only phase you can actually fall pregnant. And this is related to the inner summer energy, because think of summertime, right? Like I know here in Australia in summer, you are not laying in bed. Like you're getting up, the sun's up early, you're going to the beach, you're going out, you're seeing friends, you're feeling really motivated. And so that is really like the energy of this phase within our body, and our hormones are peaking as well. Then we move to the luteal phase, which is the longest phase of our cycle. And this is the phase between our ovulation and our period. So a lot of women do struggle with this phase, it being related to like autumn energy. Thinking of autumn, it's like the old leaves are falling from the trees. It's beginning to cool down again. You know, it's that energy of like starting to go within. And yeah, a lot of women do struggle with this phase, although that is like such a huge conversation that I feel like I don't want to get too lost in right now. But I just would like love to say that like if you find that you get like PMS or like really struggle with this phase, I think a really beautiful thing for you to start doing is to simply just like actually honoring what emotions do try to come to the surface for you, because potentially they're just trying to fall away like the leaves off the trees in autumn time, and maybe you have resistance in letting go of them.
Yeah, the 4 phases of the bleed cycle and the seasons is something that I learned from you, and I just found it to be so interesting. There's so many synchronicities like this, more than just the menstrual cycle that we find in our reality. You know, that there's not to get into other conversations, but there are more synchronicities. So that's why I just find it, yeah, extremely interesting. And not to backtrack to what you were saying before about back in high school, but I wanted to add that, you know how well, in my primary school, they started teaching sex ed in grade 4. So at a very young age in primary school.
Oh my gosh.
And I was actually that child, like the one child in my entire grade that wasn't my parents never signed the slip to allow me to go. So I would always, when the whole grade would go into the hall to I don't know, learn about sex while they're like under 10 years old, I would be in a separate room just doing my own homework or something. So it's a little bit, it's not necessarily controversial. I think it's a bit crazy on the school's behalf to be teaching it so young, but I just thought I would add that in because you talked about it being scary in grade 8 or something.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it is kind of bizarre the way that they try to educate people. And I think it also is something where it's like you can't really blame the system because they don't even understand it themselves, right? But it's like
Yeah.
young kids, you can make it so fun, like the seasons thing, right? Like that makes it so fun, especially for young girls of being like, oh my God, I understand now. But the way they just kind of like jump straight in there, you're lucky that you sat outside and watched homework because you probably wouldn't have got too much from it anyway.
No, yeah, I remember I would just sit at lunchtime and then everyone would be talking about it and they were saying that was so gross when they showed the condom or something. And I would have no idea. I'd be so clueless, but also just kind of trying to pick up on what they were saying. So I don't know, I just remember that. And honestly, in hindsight, I'm definitely grateful for being that child. So anyways, we'll proceed. So thank you for your really detailed explanation of the four seasons. Hopefully everyone understood, and if they didn't, they can just go back and listen to it again because I think I'll even listen to it again. So um, I also wanted to ask you about if like does our reaction to our first bleed as women when we first get our period, how does that impact us, you know? Because for example, there are stories of some girls that from the very beginning, from the first period, they were kind of just shun on it. Maybe they had a bad experience. So can you please talk about that?
Of course, I love this question, and I feel like it's such like a different question. Like I feel like it's something I've never been asked before, but I'm just so grateful that your mind is just so expansive and you thought of this question. Because as soon as you said this, like what came to my mind straight away was a client of mine who, when she first came to me, she was someone who very much like rejected her like feminine self, right? She was like, I just don't think I could ever live in alignment with my cycle. I work like all the time, I've got kids, like all the things. And she just didn't believe it was could ever be possible for her. And she just instantly, if I said, how does your period make you feel? She'd just be like, stuck and gross. And we actually went back to this core story, right? Like when she first got her first ever bleed, and it happened in school, and she actually got locked in the bathroom, had no idea what was going on. Like the toilet door literally broke. So she was trapped in there. So she was, if you look at that energetically, she's trapped, she's stagnant, she's stuck. It's not going to feel very comfortable, is it? And that was like a whole experience for her where she also went through like the emotions of embarrassment, because then everyone in kind of the school kind of knew like, oh, she was the girl that got locked in the bathroom and then was like bleeding, it was like a thing. And it was really interesting working with her and bringing the awareness there for her of, isn't it interesting that your first bleed, you experienced feeling embarrassed, you experienced feeling stuck and stagnant and gross and sweaty, stuck in that toilet cubicle, right? Why would then your period mirror through your whole life being something that's comfortable and not stagnant and not restrictive? And when we brought the awareness there, she just like burst into tears and was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of that before. And it then allowed her to see her cycle from such a different lens of like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't have my children if it wasn't for my bleed. Like, we got to work through that on like almost a subconscious level. So you asking that question, 110%, the experience you have from your first bleed, whether it's your mum shutting you down or your mum not celebrating you maybe the way that you wanted to be celebrated, of course that's going to, you know, what's the word? Maybe impact you unconsciously, whether you are aware of it or not. It is going to create those stories around how you should be feeling with your bleed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I've always thought of some of the families that have a celebration when the daughter gets their first period, or it's kind of, I think it's called a period party. Is that something that is actually traditional and most of the world has just forgotten or lost touch with?
Yes, and I'm so like grateful that you actually just brought this in here, because I feel like it's something that's beginning to be like a little bit more normalized. Like as we go, like people are starting to open back up to these things again. But I'm not sure if you're aware, if you've heard of the red tent before.
Wait, I actually was going to mention this. There's some tribes where the women, when they're bleeding, they stay in a tent for a week or something. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And the red tent's
Yes.
the same place where like if you birthed a child, you would stay there for like a week as well. It's like just basically a woman's tent. Like think of like you go in there on your bleed and like the village. And that's like where this like saying comes from, like it takes like a village to raise a child, because like literally traditionally this is how it used to be, of women who were bleeding would go to the red tent and they would nourish each other. Like you would get massages, you would hear stories from the wise women of the community who have passed that stage of bleeding, and that's how the stories were passed on. It was just like this beautiful place where women would just go and feel so safe, and men respected that completely, because this was what women needed to do, because we're cyclical beings, right? And a lot of the time as well, like from what I've read and like what you can kind of access these days, it was women traditionally would bleed with the new moon as well. And it was like that time, like they were very inward and just in circle. And I just think like women who get to experience that period party and like celebrating having their period, I would love if there was like statistics or something done right on like whether they are the girls that like get endometriosis and PCOS and like all of these conditions around their cycle, or if they actually just have like a completely breezy cycle. Because I can probably guarantee when you look at it from like the lens I look at your period from, they probably have absolutely no issues or next to none, unless it's like lifestyle factors contributing to that.
Exactly. So that's the whole psychological impact on our cycles as well. But yeah, I'm
Yeah.
so glad that you knew about talking about this, because I only knew a little bit about these red tents, but it just, I don't know, it sounds very familiar and very comfortable when I hear you talk about it. So
Yeah.
that's extremely interesting. So those women in those red tents and having such a strong connection to their cycle, that would have been very spiritually healing. But because
Mm.
most of the world, the women don't experience that today, you know, we go and do sport on our periods, or we go to work on our periods, or school, or whatever it is, and it's almost like a, when you're living that lifestyle, the period becomes an inconvenience, because unless you wear, you know, a tampon where it's less likely to notice it, it's just, you know, it depends on your own circumstance, whether you have symptoms like PMS symptoms or whatnot, whether you really notice your period throughout your life. But there's going to be a completely different spiritual connection to our period today than there used to be in these
Mm.
tribes. So can you please touch on this?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, of course I can. Um, the like something that I really want to bring into this conversation is something that I think a lot of women don't consider is when you think of our womb space, right? Like it's literally a soul landing pad for like souls to come from the divine, and we grow them within our beautiful bodies and then we birth them, and that's a whole experience in itself. That is a spiritual experience within itself. Like put aside the you know, it's just the physical, like this is how it happens, like put that aside. It's literally a soul landing in this space. And I think something like really cool also to remember is like being that vessel, women are so deeply connected. It's like we're dancing between two worlds. We're dancing between being so deeply connected to God or source or light, and we're here right now and we get to live this life in this dimension. And so it only makes sense to me that like women back in traditional times honored their bleeds so much, because I mean, why wouldn't you, when our bodies do what they do and we are so magical? Like it's actually magic. I just think, of course, they would honor it in the way that they do. And when you just like brought in like, you know, this lifestyle and like just what we live right now can feel almost like our period is an inconvenience. I would just love to like add, like if anyone listening feels like your period is an inconvenience, then for as long as you tell yourself that, of course it will be. It's like anything. As long as you tell yourself that you are, you know, not living your dream life, or that you are sad, or like whatever, you're going to be that. It's like literally the law of attraction. So how can you like create your own red tent experience, your next bleed? And it might feel really weird because you've never done it before, but maybe it just looks like giving yourself a massage, or spending some time just with you, or running yourself a hot bath. And in these moments where we get to create those red tent experiences for ourselves, you'll begin to land in like a deeper appreciation for actually how incredible your body is, and actually how amazing it is to be a woman, and how much magic we have within us at any given moment.
Yeah, beautiful. And I'm curious what your advice would be to mothers that either have a young daughter that hasn't gotten their first period yet, or what would be your method for your own daughter if you had one who was getting her first period? I want to know how you would do that.
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is get to know your own cycle, get to know yourself, like I'll send you a link to just like a free cycle tracker that I have to leave in like below, and like literally just download that, start tracking your cycle. Not just with an app, like actually with yourself intimately every day. How am I feeling? How does this phase feel? Get to know yourself, because unless you know yourself and your own cycle, it's not really of benefit to your daughter. But it very much one comes to like honoring yourself, connecting with yourself. And if I put myself in the position of, say, I had a daughter about to go into her bleed, I would just start to like educate her, but from such an empowered lens of like, look at the seasons that we go through and like how incredible that we get to go through them too. And just allowing her to not feel fear around that you're going to have your period forever and it's going to be an inconvenience, like not instilling those stories. And like even just breath connection or like guided meditations to the sacral chakra, right? Like it doesn't matter what age a woman is, like that's so special for a little girl before bed to like listen to something like that. Yeah, I feel like that's like
Yeah, beautiful.
maybe what I would
And
do.
a little bit similar to this question, or branching off from it, I'm curious about what your opinion is behind the energetics of the different um, sanitary items for periods, because there's a lot of talk about, oh, you want to find organic cotton because then it's not going to be bleached or deodorized, etc. But I'm wondering about the energetics of it, because if I think
Mm.
about it, do tampons that are holding the blood in, are they technically holding the energy in, or is that why maybe a pad is better to allow the energy to flow? Because I think tampons are more modern, possibly to help women keep up with the masculine lifestyle. So would you please talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, this is so interesting. So like I've never worn a tampon. I'm 25 next month. I've never worn a tampon. And it's really funny because I find that is my intuition for many years of my life telling me that's just not right. That's just not normal. Because and absolutely no shame to anyone who uses them, but I personally feel like it's almost like you're putting a plug on your flow. You're putting a plug in it. You're not allowing your body to just do simply what she is here to do. Um, and and menstrual cups quite similar as well, right? Like it's not a time of your cycle to be putting anything in there. It's a time of allowing yourself to let go, to release, to shed. Menstrual cups, I know a lot of like friends and like women I know love them because you can then use the blood like much more easier for rituals and things like that. But personally, free bleeding is just like, I know it's not like achievable for everyone, but period undies are just actually incredible. You can get ones to swim in, so you're not like restricted at that time. We are very lucky in this day and age to have access to some of the things we have access to. It's just about accessing discernment within yourself of what actually is healthy and right for you. And I personally do believe that tampons are really just putting a plug on it. And um yeah, just even certain sanitary items like, when there's like fragrance pads and things like that's just throw that in the bin. Please don't use that. Like it's so bad for your health. So I will always be like an advocate for period undies or simply just free bleeding. Like literally, this is a little woo-woo, but like next bleed, try it, go sit out on the earth, like somewhere, just like and free bleed onto the earth. And I promise you, you're going to get like such a rush of just like, holy shit, this is what it's like to be a woman. Um, it's incredible because that's
Yeah.
traditionally what it's not something to be afraid of at all. We've just been told that it's disgusting.
Yeah, this is something I've never heard of, that particular practice. And then also period undies. I'm not even familiar with that, because I always thought, oh, if you want to go swimming on your period, you need to wear a tampon. That's the only option. So, and then if I think back to throughout high school, I this is something that I don't know if period undies could have helped me, but when I did high level gymnastics, So I was
Mhm.
competing like multiple weekends a month, and I went to nationals all the time. So I was in a leotard quite often. So that's something
Yes.
where it's like I don't even know how this worked historically because I don't know when tampons were invented, but yeah, anyways, so but the period undies I think everyone should definitely look into, and then also that practice of sitting bare on the earth, I think that's very interesting as well and
Yeah,
very
and
curiosity sparking.
I also just want to add, like if you are someone who trains for a sport and it's actually not achievable for you to wear period undies, like that is okay. Like you have that, like it's your body, and if that's how for maybe a couple of years or whatever, that's what actually feels really good for you and really comfortable for you. That's perfect. That's what they're there for, right?
Yeah.
We can, as long as you're not using one and going like in with that energy of like, oh, like shame on me, I shouldn't be using this. Like really just knowing that like we do have access to those items if it is necessary for the lifestyle that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think you already touched on this a little bit earlier when you described the four seasons, but is there anything else you wanted to add about how a little bit more in depth about how we can live by the four seasons when it comes to exercise, food, and lifestyle in general?
Yeah, so something I always just love to tell my clients is like when it comes to movement, for example, it's really easy to go, if you just go to a normal gym or you're on Instagram or whatever it might be, and you're seeing other girls sorry, other men and stuff that are just like lifting really heavy all the time. You're kind of like, oh, I want to like do that. And like some women can as well. If they're a lot of the time if they're on like birth control and it's affecting their hormones in that way, like they can kind of just keep powering through. But something I always just love to tell my clients is it doesn't mean you can't weight lift every phase of your cycle. Although don't be expecting to hit a personal best when you are bleeding, in comparison to when you're in your ovulation, because your hormones are just actually not there to support you to do that. So when it comes to movement, I just love to say like yoga, Pilates, really beautiful for the yin phases, which is like the luteal phase and our bleed time. Whereas you can really like do the running and like the more intense things like the HIIT classes during ovulation and your follicular phase. But just not sort of always checking in with yourself, because we're not carbon copies of each other. So for you, it may look like going for a jog on your bleed, and that's a really cool way that you like to release your energy. That might really work for your body. I guess my like, if I was to narrow all of that down, I always just tell everyone like listen to your intuition. Like your body does know, and even if you find it hard to access that intuition, start tracking your cycle. You'll deepen your connection to yourself, and it's actually just going to become like second nature to you.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, and do you have any final messages that you would like to touch on about the feminine side of women whilst living in a masculine world?
Again, I feel like it just very much comes back to once you understand what's going on in your body, it makes it a lot easier to optimize your own lifestyle around the structure that you've kind of been handed and can't sort of back away from. You know what I mean? Like if you're working a 9 to 5, it can be like, well, how can I live in alignment with my cycle if I have to go to work every day? How in those micro moments though can you actually optimize your life to support your body? Maybe it's driving to work when you're on your bleed without a podcast playing in your ears and actually just like silence. Maybe it's getting up a little bit earlier and doing a yoga flow to have that time for you so that you can go into your day like with a regulated nervous system and actually just like have had that space for you. And then that's something I just really love to teach. And like I share a lot of that over on my Instagram of just like living in alignment with your cycle, but not making it like having to be that you're in your real feminine flow. And although there's space for that, we're not really in the society that we can do that every single day. So I think it just comes to like having the education, empowering yourself, and actually knowing what phase you're in.
Yeah, amazing. And then I'm sure everyone is really curious about what you actually do. So how you help women, what is your role to play in this world?
Yeah. I it's so interesting because I still feel like I'm landing in like completely what I've come here to do. Like as we kind of do, right? Like we journey through different roles until we get to like who we actually are. But as I mentioned at the start, I've done studied Bowen therapy, so I love supporting women in that physical way and like actually balancing their body and balancing their hormones, supporting circulation. But womb healing is like just such an incredible thing that I practice. Sorry, probably thing isn't the right word. Practice that I love to practice. And that is really a holistic practice that I'm bringing awareness to your womb space. We're healing generational trauma. We're healing limiting beliefs. We're clearing emotions and really just like bringing that connection to yourself. But I also work with women, you know, online and in different ways where we just simply optimize your lifestyle so that you can be productive. You can feel really good in your body. You don't have to be limited by your period. And you just feel really, really good in yourself. So I guess I'm just very multifaceted in what I do and how I support women with their health.
Yeah, amazing. And I am personally a testimonial of your work. So, um, and how can people contact you if their interest has definitely been sparked by this beautiful conversation?
I would definitely say Instagram's the best place. So my handle is Sacred Space W Tanika Lace. Over there, I've got like my link tree, which links you to like my podcast, to my website, to all other places that you can kind of get into my world. And don't hesitate to message me. Like if you've listened to this and you're like curious and you're like, you know, what's my next step? Like, please don't hesitate to message me because that is exactly what I'm here for. I want you to feel like you know your cycle. And I've got so many free resources just to get you started and get you on your feet with understanding your cycle.
Great. And I'll link everything in the description. So, is there anything else that you want to touch on before we finish up our call?
I feel like that was like so good. I just loved our conversation. I loved
Me
your
too.
questions, like how innovative you are. Oh my gosh, I would love to do this again with you sometime in the future and go even deeper on some of the topics. But thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm sure we absolutely will. The questions were the way that they were because I'm genuinely very interested in your work, and I'm really grateful that there is someone like you out there with your particular mission, helping women, because I see the world the way it is today. So thank you, Tanika, and I'm really excited to be talking to you again.